Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 43, or one of the few first episodes of 2026 of This is the Year. In this particular podcast, today, in the fashion of the World Economic Forum here in Switzerland, we are deep diving into a few topics as always. I'm joined once again by Joao, and the topics today are the conundrum of the layoffs, aka maybe also the job shortages of early stage career entry level jobs, for example, junior developers, junior data scientists, junior business professionals. And we have some sort of an argument quickly if that's because of AI or because of other factors, and how you in the audience, if you are affected by this or if you're soon looking for a job after you graduate, might actually counteract. In the second part of the episode today, we are deep diving briefly into some new models. Joao, how are you doing before we get started? Lisbon, I heard, is the coldest winter since a while, no?
The coldest winter since a while. It's very good to be indoors playing with AI. They haven't made like those custom pins from UMain, like where you have to wear them outside. So it's better to just stay inside, play along with the models, see what the research is about, and then bring them on to the podcast.
In terms of cold, there is always this like question mark, how cold is it really? Because in Switzerland currently it's 0. What is cold for you in Lisbon currently? Is it snowing?
I mean, we're still a few degrees away from 0. I think we went to 5, 6 to 7 degrees. It's still
really okay.
It's cold. It's cold because we're not used to having this kind of temperatures. So no one's built for it. No one has the jackets to withstand this kind of cold. Maybe like you're bringing up stuff you were at a snow trip like 2 years ago, but in day to day, and then it gets hot like in half an hour. So you go outside in a t-shirt, and then it's raining and it's 5 degrees again. So it's hard to predict. Most like AI, it's hard to predict what's coming.
Exactly. So maybe that we leave it for the second part of today's episode. Let me set the stage just mentally also into a colder region in Switzerland, in Davos, which is currently hosting the annual gathering of all the experts and politicians across the world. All the people in power are flocking into Davos for the World Economic Forum. And strongly linked to that, I thought it makes sense to start today's episode also by some feedback I've heard by many, many of my students, especially soon to be graduates in the business and IT world, that it seems increasingly more difficult to land an entry-level job. And before I can quickly gather also your opinion, Joao, just to set the stage a bit more broadly, this might be due to artificial intelligence being at these organizations. I do have an opinion on that just in a second. But secondly, also, it might be due to some other factors that we might have actually overhired before or after COVID. There is always a bit of a fluctuation in the labor market. And maybe now this is a bit of a cooling down, and it might actually not be due to AI. Something that we can probably commonly agree on, Joao, is it is really, really important, sometimes probably even a little bit more important, in order to get an entry-level job, to be incredibly proficient in artificial intelligence-based systems and tools, something we ongoingly talk about on this show here, because this is ultimately the toolbox and the stack you might actually be encountering at the corporate jobs that you might actually joining. What I've seen, just based on my personal experience as a lecturer for many, many years, is it is usually not taught at uni. So you have to, unless you're lucky and you're going to some classes that I'm sometimes teaching. But if you don't have that, you might actually have to get the knowledge from outside. What's your understanding, Joao? Is it actually because of AI? Is it because of some other things? And what can young folk do currently?
We have seen a huge boom in like a diversity of AI tools. There's chatbots like ChatGPT, but there are specific AI tools for image generation, documents, like creative writing. There's new tools coming up probably every single week, if not every single day. And it's hard to keep up with the latest possible, like the most recent tool. But you should at least have an effort or make an effort into knowing what's out there. I have seen and I've talked to people who send me screenshots of ChatGPT for something, and I just usually respond them with the link to Google AI Studio, because they're using the free version of ChatGPT, which gives them an okay-ish model, but you don't have access to like the top model with the top research or the top features of ChatGPT. But you can have access to the top features of Gemini, which are comparable, if not even better sometimes, than ChatGPT, and you do it for free. So this small little changes of what tools you use, even what chatbots you use, and when you use them makes a difference. You said that's harder to get entrance level jobs. I think so too. But at the same time, it's even easier now to bootstrap yourself into doing your own thing from scratch. So if you're starting a company in the 2010s, you'd have to hire a lawyer and have to talk to people and do some very deep research on how to set up a company. Nowadays, you can have that research halved or just do a tenth of the research, because you can ask Gemini, ask ChatGPT. Of course, you should follow up on the links, but you can understand how to set up your own thing and how to learn whatever it is you don't know by yourself. And maybe you need a team of 10 to 15 people to set up a company. Now you need you and probably a good buddy of yours or someone that's just the right fit for you, and you can set up your own thing. Not for everyone. It's not easy, but it's way easier than it was 15 years ago.
I think it's a very valid point. I mean, this is something I've just put some really, I would say, longer thinking about it. Again, the students in today's world, or if you're even generally on the job market, on the lookout, you can actually take back agency just by becoming really, really proficient with the tooling itself. Yes, you might go into the directionality that you mentioned, Joao, into starting your own business. Back in the day, difficult without having many engineers. Now we can start up shop with 4 or 5 individuals with tools like Versal V0, with tools like Replit, Lovable, just on the front of engineering. But then you might actually be also using sales tools for SDRs, for lead generation, outbound, inbound, and all the messaging might actually also be automated. Just on that notion, without giving too many shout outs here on the video, but I'll put some link into the description for you guys to check out. Mostly the engineering components and the sales components, because ultimately, when you're just starting out, I think these are like the two biggest bottlenecks. If you're going into the venture route, if you're not going to the venture route, you can still, as you mentioned before, Shwao, you can still experiment with advanced model usage, like for example, Claude. You don't have to only use a free GPT. Because you can actually do a lot more with, for example, Claude, and so on and so forth. So I think becoming incredibly proficient, understanding how the tools work, to prompt, to context engineer, and maybe also to skill engineer in the future, might actually be opening some new lenses also for your employability in general. I will quickly just read a quote by Demis Hassabis from DeepMind, and he also basically just underlined the argument that we've made. He mentioned, get really unbelievably proficient with these agentic AI tools to the extent that those of us that are building it, meaning the Geminis, the Anthropics, and the Googles of the world, they are so busy that it's very hard for them even to test what the models can do. They're constantly trying to improve the LLMs, but they're not really also spending, at least in his thinking, sufficient time to get a hang of today's knowledge and tools. So that's a little bit his vision. So basically, this whole conundrum can be better than doing an internship, is what he was mentioning, because you can actually leapfrog your into a position that's incredibly proficient with AI. Do you agree with this, or you believe it's still good to do an internship in 2026?
I was never a big fan of internships. It's, I think, really dependent on the company you're doing it with, what team you're doing it with. And I get how hard it is to find like a first job and to start building up your resume. I still think there's some degree of entrepreneurship, even if you're in IT or some other areas, that you can try to build things on your own, and that if doesn't give you the resume you want, at least give you the skills that you'll need later. We'll have like plenty of histories from guys in big tech that get out of big tech. They're starting in their own company, and they find out how much they're not as good of engineers as they thought they were, because in big tech, in very big companies even, you work very specifically at one thing. Like you're a cog in a very big machine, so you have a very specific function. If you're in a smaller company, if you're having your own company, you have to do more things. So you get like a wide array of skills that basically can get you out of any situation. And that's kind of the goal that I think I try to advise people when they're first starting out. For medium, like mid to senior level positions, people talk about AGI or replacing everyone and how close AGI is to us. So far, the research is pointing to more custom, personalized, or specific agents. So a lot of the research is going to making coding agents. A lot of the money is going to making coding agents. So they're very good at coding. And we'll see in the future specific agents good at specific things. AGI, as smart as you and me, or smart as like anyone, is still probably a few years away, but it's super hard to predict when it might come. I think what we might see, and we're still seeing, is the adaptation of big companies getting these tools, and they're dumping a lot of money into it, on buying these tools, integrating into the workspace, training people into them, and having them work. Like we saw last year, and there was a report about it. Most AI tools sometimes fail because they were built in a rush, because they were built in this like startup world that you have to launch something, you have to ship something very, very fast, but also because the models were, still being developed and they didn't have the time to actually refine it. We're getting to a point where the tools are becoming very, very good. And if they're used correctly, they'll give you a boost. But you have to choose the right ones and you have to use them and know how to use them.
I think it's a valid point. And ultimately, I remember a few years ago, the dean of my two universities that I'm affiliated with, actually both of them kind of had the conundrum that the students shouldn't be using AI. They should actually just ignore it and just basically study without AI and study just in the classical method. Fast forward to 2026, I think this was an inadequate reasoning. And I'm happy I mostly ignored it in that sense, because I do believe there is a skill that can be acquired that is basically AI proficiency or AI literacy or AI expertism, whatever you want to call it, but the usage of AI tools on a day-to-day basis for your job. That is a skill that you need to learn. At the same time, also maybe the second point, where in a world where many, even entry-level employees or senior employees and or founders are actually using and implementing a lot of AI, some skill seems to be more granular and becoming more important in the world of business. And that is presentations, pitching, and ideally in a sense where you also kind of need to sell it a little bit. So if you're a founder, you need to sell your AI engineered SaaS. If you are basically interviewing for a job, you need to sell yourself. And within an organization, especially if many of the heavy lifting is conducted by AI, the research, maybe even the slide designs, maybe the concepts, the frameworks, you most likely still need to go to all these meetings, these boards, these decision, Kanban, alignment meetings, and you need to present, pitch, and I think this skill doesn't go away. What do you think, Joao? Is it the same from your perspective, or you believe this is
I think that
AI
that's been the
soon as
truth for the last 6 to 7 years. I mean, at least as long as I've been in software, and I've been in software for, I think, over 12 years now. I started pretty early. Is writing code is a skill, and you learn that skill. And maybe you can now outsource that skill to the LLMs. They're getting better and better at it. But being a software engineer was never just about writing code. People always joked about it because the client doesn't know what the client wants. You have to come up with ideas, be the bridge, be good at communicating, and actually present ideas, present options, and then iterate through them, analyze them, test them. Writing code was like, the more senior you are as a software engineer, the less you usually write code. Some people go into team managers and people manager, and that's a whole new topic. But even as a software engineer, if you go to like very senior level, like principal or staff level engineers, most times you're spending time writing architecture, making decisions, deciding on what to do. And then the execution part, the writing code part, is maybe like 10-15% of your time. And that part is being outsourced to AI. That part was usually outsourced to interns. And now it's a bit to AI. So I think people should maybe, because they have that skill already, they can take it for granted. They can focus on the higher level skills or deciding architecture. Even if you're an intern outside, like just got out of university, you're starting to code, figure out how to do architecture, figure out how to do like the higher level things, because that's what will be needed the most as humans.
I think it's a valid point. I mean, just for me to synthesize your words and combine what I mentioned before to draw a conclusion, many things that I guess the human workforce used to do will and might be actually soon, to be honest, be done by AI. So you need to know how AI can do your work. And that still requires human interaction, human validation, human in the loop corrections, maybe delegation. So this is this component of basically the delegation of all these tasks and then reviewing and giving it back to the AI. This is a skill you probably have to learn as well. And at the same time, ongoingly become better at presentation. So that's a little bit maybe the high level findings that I see talking to many students and many professionals. I just try to meet in the middle. So students can actually acquire these skills during uni and then really go and high perform, even as a junior role in quotation marks, in the real world or as a founder. So I think it's definitely not too late to learn AI. I think it's the perfect moment because for the first time, you can actually use it in a business context and not only to generate funny memes. So that's just the first part. Joe, you also mentioned some Chinese models or generally open source updates for the second stage of the pod. What do you have for us?
The world of the top LLMs is an ever-changing world because new models come up, and sometimes they get to the podium, sometimes they do not. Right now, if you go into the forums of open source models and open weights models, you'll find usually the top 3 companies. They're all Chinese, but that's to be expected at this point. We don't see a lot of US companies in the open source world. Z.ai, the GLM models, and the GLM models, I think we're in the 4.7. So we have GLM 4.7, we have GLM 4.7 Air, which is a lighter model, easier to run locally, is one of the most talked about models out there. Very good and very performant, but completely open source, so you can play around with it as free as you want. You can use the API if you want. You also have Moonshot AI with the Kimi K2 models and Minimax and they have a whole lineup of models to mention. So the top 3 AI companies at the moment. You're not hearing DeepSeek, because DeepSeek, I've been reading a lot about them, but a lot about research. So they are putting a lot of research. They're making themselves known through their research, but not releasing new models, or at least not being super, not building a brand with the models that they launch, but with the research that they launch. And the research that they launched, again, it's going to customize models, specific models, and not AGI, at least not yet. And this is important if you're building an AI model, or if you're building an AI company, or if you have a big company and you want to have AI services. A lot of the times you'll find that the big models from OpenAI, the GPT models or the Claudes or Geminis of Google, they come with terms and licenses, and they come with restrictions on how and where you can use them. And for example, OpenAI, if you go through Azure, I mean, they're hosting the models, you pay them and you get access to the models. They'll host your data and they'll save your data, I think, for 30 to 60 days just for audit purposes. And maybe you're okay with that. Maybe you work in a very specific, highly sensitive information. You don't want to do that. So it's good to keep an eye on the open source ones. Just have an alternative in case you want to build something more custom to you.
Sounds good. So there is some models on the horizon. I think maybe we can close the show just by the last argument: when, how, and if we reach to a state where we call AGI or artificial superintelligence. It's probably still some years away. Some people say it's it's half a decade or more than a decade. I think we first need to have a breakthrough in the model improving itself, like really to close this feedback loop by releasing the model, and then this model can then augment itself, coming out with new research, with new algorithmic improvements, maybe even chip design, and the whole stack just has to go with it. Until we don't have that, I just don't see an accelerant in maybe being more close to AGI, and we just probably have some incremental improvements. But once the models actually are able to improve themselves algorithmically, but then through the whole stack, they might still take, without really having some sort of concrete numbers, but maybe not months, but then weeks, and then from weeks to maybe days, we don't see AGI just yet. So that's a little bit my last read, just on to the show of today. What do you have as a counter argument here?
That has been theorized, and I think it happens quicker than you think. Not the point where they actually improve themselves. I'm not sure when that's going to happen. I mean, to the point where a model can almost autonomously or semi-autonomously improve itself and make a new, better version of itself. But if it does, if you get that point, then you'll reach AGI, if you haven't already, in a matter of probably a span of a year. Because as soon as a model makes a better version of itself, a new better version would be even better and smarter. They'll make a better version of itself. And so it's an exponential increase in complexity and IQ. And so I think once we reach that inflection point, it's a very, very short time until we reach AGI. And I don't think we're entirely ready for it. In terms of infrastructure to host it, but also in terms of a lot of regulations and just general direction on how to use it. So hopefully we'll have maybe months, maybe a few years to figure it out. But I think without a doubt that we're going to have something very similar in the next decade or so.
It's a good point to wrap up. The only thing, again, as like a bit of the roadblock, just to me at least, it seems, yes, it might improve itself, but the training, at least if it's done in the same fashion like today, still in today's world takes a few months. Maybe that takes 10 weeks. And then during these weeks of training, when the new model is actually being, again, improved by the old model, unless it actually really understands itself to be trained faster and not just better, we still more or less have the same time horizon. So that's a little bit what I think about. Not only do we need software improvements, we also need kind of the entire value chain that needs to be improved at the same time. And currently these training runs are usually many, many months. So until they're not becoming minutes or days, I just don't see this wheel really flying and taking off. But TBD in the future. But that was a little bit the show of today, some freestyle episode on the WEF / job scarcity, or at least what we've here on the streets as well. And at the same time, some, well, maybe look out what actually can come next in the last maybe decade without having super intelligence. TBD. Great.
We'll
Joe,
see.
thanks for joining today. And we see each other in the next episode. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care. See you next week.